Hello, everybody. My name is Mark Tokman. I'm a professor of marketing and logistics in the College of Business and also the coordinator for the Global Supply Chain Minor, and I'm your host today. During the month of May, we will have 5 speakers who will share their experiences with us in regards to the lessons learned from supply chain disruptions caused by COVID-19. Today's speaker is Mr. Tony Glass. Tony is a JMU dad. His daughter Madison graduated from JMU College of Business in 2019. I believe Tony also has a son graduating from college this week, so he is well on his way to freedom from tuition payments. Professionally, Tony Glass is the Senior Vice President, Global Business Development and Marketing at EFL Global, a global leader in supply chain and freight forwarding solutions. He drives business growth by leading the sales team, identifying new business opportunities, and managing customer relationships. He also leads global marketing initiatives for multiple digital channels. Tony has 25 years of professional experience working for organizations in both the consumer and B2B sectors, including Gap, Kuehne Nagel, and Under Armour. He has extensive experience in domestic and international logistics and supply chain management. Tony has been on the JMU Global Supply Chain Management Executive Advisory Board since the very beginning in 2018. Following Tony's presentation, we will take some questions from the audience. You can use the Q&A function below your screen to submit your questions. And Tony, the stage is yours. We can begin with your presentation.
I appreciate it, Mert. Thanks for the opportunity. I really do appreciate calling out the fact that I'm on my way to tuition freedom. It's one of the most exciting times I can think of. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now, and we'll go through this presentation. Perfect. Okay. So again, thank you for the opportunity to be a part of the speaker series. I really appreciate it. Appreciate everything that you guys are doing at JMU, and Mert, I really appreciate your involvement and including me in this journey on developing a supply chain management program at JMU. I'm very happy to be a part of it. As Mert had discussed earlier, I have quite a bit of experience on the customer side, which makes the perspective that I brought to the provider side a bit unique. I did spend 10 years at the Gap and 12 years at Under Armour managing international supply chain operations for both organizations. Made the decision in 2017 to join EFL so I could add a different perspective and value to customers that I was a part of, frankly, for 20 plus years. COVID-19 was something, frankly, that no one had anticipated globally. It had an impact, obviously, on everyone personally and professionally, and it shared or spared no geography. That being said, I wanted to kind of go through a little bit of a timeline for you on the impact of COVID-19 specific to the global transportation industry. In January of 2019, when we started to hear here in North America the rumblings of a potential virus outbreak in Asia, we still weren't necessarily impacted. There was still quite a bit of passenger travel. There was still very minimal disruptions in ocean shipping and air freight shipments. Consumer demand was relatively stable, and supply chains were fairly stable in January. February, same. Fast forward to March 2020, when the world went on to a lockdown. If you can remember back to March 2020, it initially started with a lockdown in Asia Pacific, in the region, from China through Southeast Asia, Indian subcontinent. There was an immediate impact on passenger travel. Flights were canceled. A little known fact to most consumers is that roughly 50% of the global air freight flies on the belly of passenger planes. So in the month of March in 2020, 50% of that capacity just went away. There was a scramble and this demand that had hit the market that had never hit the market before. And that was a demand for personal protective equipment, for PPE movements. FEMA and other global health organizations were in a scurry to secure supply and move that supply into regions all across the globe. And that had a tremendous impact beginning in March on the air freight business, frankly. You had 50% of the capacity of passenger flights were gone, very limited capacity left in the market, and this tremendous demand at the federal level to secure planes. If you remember also at that time, there was a global shutdown of retail, right? And everyone was kind of waiting in March and April and even the beginning parts of May to really see what the outbreak and the impact was going to be on life as we knew it, right? Were stores going to open? There was a lot of uncertainty in the market. But one of the things that happened with everyone being at home, kind of waiting out for the next direction, there was an absolute stunning increase in direct-to-consumer activity. People are home, people were shopping, people were taking, that discretionary income that they weren't using to travel, that they weren't using to go out to eat, and they were buying consumer goods online. So in June of 2020, there was this massive increase in demand, still extremely limited capacity on both ocean and air freight. With the flight cancellations, the limited freighter capacity, ocean carriers not operating, it caused the rates to absolutely increase. In some markets and some particular trade lanes, those increases were 10x what they were 3 months prior, which had a tremendous impact on consumer goods pricing. Right? You fast forward again, end of June, there was this surge in consumer demand. The requirements for the movement of PPE started to decline, right? As a lot of that inventory had moved from original source. Alternative sources were developed in North America and in Europe. There was less of a need for the movement of ventilators and masks and gowns. Still an increased need for the movement of nitrile gloves. They occupied a tremendous amount of capacity in the market. But then there was also this large rush to fulfill and restock inventory levels in the US and in European distribution operations for well-known brands. That was a problem that continued throughout the entire summer of 2020. In December of 2020, the strength in the market and the volumes again started to rise. There was just significant consumer demand. And you can see that reflective in any of the SEC reports from publicly traded retailers. They had very, very strong year in 2020 financially. There was still a lack of space and a lack of equipment. And just to speak about that lack of equipment, a lot of consumers don't necessarily understand. Those containers that move on those steamship lines, roughly most steamship lines carry anywhere from 7 to 14,000 of those containers. When those containers had moved to specific regions in March, and then there was no activity to reposition those containers back to origin in June and July and August, there created this imbalance. You had demand in Southeast Asia, China manufacturing points. You had no or limited equipment availability, which caused extreme delays in shipping. Right? It wasn't necessarily transit times that were impacted because that vessel leaving Hong Kong going into Long Beach on the west coast of the US is still a 14-day transit. The problem was waiting at origin, trying to find a container, sometimes 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks before you had the availability of the container to load to put onto that vessel. So it caused extreme delays in transit and extreme delays in fulfillment. And that continued all the way through the end of 2020. Then starting in January of 2021, you had, this push for the global vaccine distribution, right? And along with that, simultaneously, there was also a massive technology launch. Apple and Samsung coming out with new products, Sony coming out with new products, and they gobbled up and acquired the remaining air capacity that was in the market. So again, you had this federal medical mandate for capacity to help with global vaccine distribution. You had this push for consumer electronics, and then you had this demand for retailers to restock inventory on their shelves. And it continued to be a struggle in January 2021. Everyone was hoping that when January hit, that the market would start to come back to some sort of normalcy. And unfortunately, that hasn't happened. March 2021, we continue to see equipment issues in ocean freight. And again, consumer demand is really through the roof still to this day. And a very slower than expected return to consumer air travel. It's really the stability of the air market is contingent on people getting on planes and flying. When people aren't flying, 50% of that capacity remains grounded, which again increases the price significantly for for retailers and frankly for end consumers. And I know I focused quite a bit on retail, but this has had an impact on raw goods and commodities as well. There's issues with lithium-ion battery inventory in the U.S. There's issues with resin, in the U.S. and those things are required for manufacturing as well. And it's across the board, across all commodities. This challenge of capacity versus demand. It was this confluence that continues to this day of increased demand, limited capacity, and then a global pandemic. And the global pandemic has impacts that aren't necessarily visible to the end consumer. They're very visible to logistics and supply chain managers across the globe for sure. But if you have an outbreak, for example, at a port, if you have an outbreak at a warehouse, if you have an outbreak at the factory, it has tremendous impact down the supply chain. And then as recently as this past month, we've seen significant COVID outbreaks in India and Cambodia and Brazil. Cambodia and Bangladesh just extended their lockdown through May 16th. They've got all of their factories are closed. Their port operations are only allowing essential movement of goods into country and out of country. And we continue to see the supply versus demand issue within global transportation. We're forecasting the industry, not just me, but the industry is forecasting that this will remain an issue through the end of 2021. We are hoping the efforts that the vessel owners, the ocean carriers on blank sailings, moving equipment specifically to reposition containerized equipment, we're hoping that over the next 3 months will create a better balance of the equipment needed and the demand. We're hoping to see more consumer flights as countries become more vaccinated. We're hoping to see consumer travel increase, and we're hoping to see those flights come back into rotation, which again will relieve some of the pressure in the air market. But for all intents and purposes, 2021 is going to continue to be a challenge from a global transportation perspective. And we've been speaking specifically about international transportation, but the impact is real on the domestic side as well. With that increased demand, you have a tremendous amount of pressure on domestic transportation networks. And very frankly, there were a number of domestic transportation providers whose drivers were not working in March and April and May of 2020, and who frankly decided not to come back into the industry. So there's, some would say a 30 to 40% reduction in the amount of drivers that are on the road moving full truckload and less truckload movements through North America. And that's a real impact. Increase in consumer direct to consumer e-commerce, last mile delivery firms are stretched very, very thin. So this is all the way from the origin of the product all the way through to delivery to your home. There's an impact on transportation that we feel is going to be there through the end of this year. So the effects that this has really had on the global economy, there was absolute global economic shock. Businesses were closed. There were some bankruptcies that happened, and most of those bankruptcies, we've learned in hindsight, were really opportunistic for some businesses to reposition themselves financially and adjust their strategy when it came to real estate leases. Most companies that filed for Chapter 11 protection during the beginning of this pandemic have all resurfaced out of that business. There were a tremendous amount of labor shortages as well, and companies really reevaluating their strategy, right? Their brick and mortar versus direct to consumer, their location of manufacture. Near sourcing, again, is a relevant topic. It's kind of cyclical. There was a large push for U.S. companies to manufacture in Asia and the Asia Pacific Rim. That conversation has gone full circle now, and it's really more about localized or near sourcing. There's been, initially a lower demand for air and ocean cargo, and the rates were very, very high. That demand has since completely changed. And then the impact on production, on factory production. So you have this situation where there's a tremendous amount of purchase orders being made with factories at origin. There's limited capacity there because they've had either a lockdown in country or a potential COVID outbreak. So there's this backup of production. The demand is still there, but it's a question of getting that product out and when you can get that product out. The canceled flights, again, I can't stress how much the impact on global transportation has been with the reduction in passenger travel. We've had a number of airports around the globe that have had to cease operations because of COVID. Reliability on scheduling is abysmal, to say the least. Right now, for example, in the ocean industry, the rates are 100% higher than they were this time last year, and their on-time delivery is below 30%. So you're paying a tremendous amount of money and you're getting worse service. Capacity extremely, extremely tight. There's tremendous amount of congestion at the ports. If you've seen on the news, if you look at the congestion in the port of Long Beach, for example, at any given time, there's been anywhere from 10 to 40 vessels at anchor, just waiting for their berthing rights. A lot of that has to do with just the simple increase in demand and the lack of labor at the port. Another piece that has to be recognized and has a tremendous impact on the entire global situation is the equipment availability, from containers at origin to chassis at destination, and repositioning that equipment to where it's needed when it's needed has been a tremendous challenge for the shipping industry. The reliability of both ocean and air. Imagine if you were a leader in supply chain for a global organization, and you're being challenged or pressed to forecast your cost, to forecast your deliveries, your on-time delivery performance. When are you going to get product into the distribution center or the consumer? And having really a challenge because no one can give you that predictability at the moment. It's a real challenge for shippers today. So a couple of learning points. These are things that, frankly, just can't stress enough. Coming out of the past year, business continuity planning is critical. And I know it's challenging, and some would say almost impossible to plan for something like this, but the lessons learned coming out of COVID, that a business continuity planning team, having something that's a living, breathing, working document, within your organization is extremely important. The other piece is the importance of relationships. You really can't underestimate how relationships across the globe, whether they're with your supplier, your freight forwarder, your transportation provider, your distribution center, your end customer, having good relationships where you can be transparent and level set expectations and lean on each other during tough times to really service a business. Relationships are what really matters. Setting customer expectations, very, very challenging when you have not a real clear expectation in times of need with a customer to maintain that relationship or really give them some predictability into their business. So setting customer expectations during a difficult time globally, I think, is absolutely critical. Sitting back after this year and looking at the vulnerability in your supply chain, whether that's from your procurement process or your sourcing strategy, your vendor partners, your suppliers, your logistics service providers, if it's vulnerabilities in your technology, in your organization, just identifying those vulnerabilities and addressing them and having some sort of contingency plan is critical. And can't stress again enough the need for transparency and communication. More than ever, being absolutely clear with what you're able to accomplish and why and how to supply chain leaders across the globe is really, really important. And communicating the changes. This world today, from a transportation industry perspective, is changing by the hour. And I know that sounds a little cliche, but it's absolutely true. You find some providers are making decisions up the supply chain that absolutely have an impact on your business, and those changes are happening every day. So communicating those changes is absolutely critical. And then the other piece is really diversification of your supplier network. Gone are the days where you would rely on a single source, right? A single source for manufacturer or a single source for transportation, any function within your supply chain. Diversification is critical. Not everyone is good at everything. And I think really understanding your business and where you're vulnerable and having the right partners and the right diversification of partners is absolutely critical. It gives you options in tough times. And then crisis preparation for the ground teams, right? Like people that are actually boots on the ground, either at your factories or your suppliers or your distribution centers or your stores. It's absolutely critical that everyone is on the same plan and everyone understands what's expected of them and what course of action they need to take in difficult times, for sure. So Mert, that's about all I had for this presentation. Would love to have some questions if there are any.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the wonderful insights, Tony. That was fantastic. And it's truly a challenging time for supply chain managers. And it seems like you guys at EFL has found ways to maneuver around them. So we will now take some questions from the audience. I actually have one that was presented to me, and I will begin with that one. And you've touched on this, when you were talking about the importance of relationships and communication. So here's the question. There are two major schools of thought, in regards to supply chain relationships. Mm-hmm. One is that we should establish few but deep relationships that are based on mutual trust. And then the other school of thought is that trust do not really help in cases of supply chain disruptions, and therefore we should establish numerous transactional level relationships to minimize dependency on a few. Yeah. Where do you stand on that?
I go by the first school of thought, to be very honest with you. I think deep relationships matter. You can never put all of your eggs in one basket. We've all heard that term before, right? But I think the fewer partners you have that your business means more to, I think that when times are tough, you will find that those relationships pay dividends. If you're a transactional partner and the world is upside down like we were during COVID-19, right? That supplier is going to go with supporting the person that gives them the most amount of transactions, right? If you have a deep relationship and your business is absolutely important and critical to that supplier, when the times get tough, they're going to look out for you. I personally believe deeper relationships with fewer providers serves a better purpose when you have some real tough hiccups.
Thank you for that. Another question is about the future of lean supply chains. So, developing preparedness for supply chain disruptions like COVID now, it goes against everything that we've developed over the years in terms of lean supply chains. So is lean becoming a notion of the past?
Well, that's a great question. I would say that from my perspective, there are absolutely parts of lean supply chain that remain relevant regardless, right? But I also think that having the ability to reevaluate your supply chain from end to end and build in the most amount of flexibility while still taking pieces of lean logistics and lean supply chain is the right course of action moving forward. So I would say the whole thing is not the ocean of the past, but it should all be reevaluated for sure.
Absolutely. And then one final, it seems that agility has also become a big part of supply chains as we are going through this experience of COVID-19. What are the best ways to achieve a more agile supply chain?
Yeah, that's another great question. I think that there is an absolute reward for any business that sits down and continuously reviews their supply chain. So a lot of organizations will develop a supply chain strategy. They complete it and they put it on a shelf, right? And they say, this is how we're going to run our business. And then when things get difficult, you don't have the ability to be agile and to respond to those changes. I think when you have an organization that is continually reviewing their supply chain, meaning continually vetting their partners, continually monitoring performance and service level agreements and the KPIs that you find important inside your organization, when you're continually trying to improve and it's at the forefront of your thoughts and your business decisions, those are the supply chains that I think will remain successful. And those are the ones that will be the most agile, in my opinion. When you have an organization that has a chief supply chain officer, you know that they take supply chain seriously.
Absolutely. Well, Tony, thank you so much for all your insights today. We really appreciate you joining us and sharing your experiences during these sort of challenging times for supply chain managers. And we really appreciate that you gave us your time. And best of luck with your son's graduation.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity and all the best, Mert. Thanks again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.